The first thing I noticed wasn't my daughter's face, it was her hands. I was still standing at the end of the driveway, rolling my suitcase over the cracked asphalt, when I saw her through the side window of the house. My house, the one I bought and paid off before I ever left for Vancouver. She was on her knees, scrubbing the baseboards in the front hallway. Hair pulled back in a rag, wearing an oversized gray t-shirt that I didn't recognize. Her hands moved in slow, tired circles. The kind of tired that doesn't come from one bad night. The kind that builds up over years. I stood there longer than I should have. I'd been on a plane for 4 hours. Before that, 2 weeks of wrapping up everything in Halifax, giving notice on the apartment, boxing up the last of my things, saying goodbye to the woman I'd worked alongside at the hospital for 11 years. Everyone kept telling me I was brave, retiring early at 63, moving back to Ontario to be closer to family. I smiled and nodded and didn't tell any of them what I was actually going back to. Because I didn't fully know yet. My name is Lorraine. I'm 64 years old now, though this story starts the summer I turned 63. I spent 12 years working as a registered nurse in Halifax, Nova Scotia, far from the house in Barrie, Ontario, that I'd left in my daughter's name when I took the position out east. It was supposed to be temporary. The posting was a 2-year contract, good pay, a chance to clear some debt after my husband passed. 2 years became 4, became 7, became 12. The house was hers. I told her so in writing. My daughter's name is Celeste. She was 26 when I left. Old enough, I told myself. Responsible enough. She had a good head on her shoulders, a steady job at a dental office, a boyfriend I'd met twice and found polite, if a little too quiet. I left her the house, a 3-bedroom, semi-detached on Sunnydale Road, worth around $420,000 when I signed the transfer. More by the time I came back. I called every Sunday for the first 3 years. Then the calls got shorter. Then she started letting them go to voicemail and texting back instead. Then the texts got shorter too. I told myself it was normal. Adult children pull away. I was busy. She was busy. I sent money when she asked, which was less and less as the years went on. I thought that meant she was doing fine. I was wrong. I found out she wasn't fine in the way you find out most important things too late. Not in one clear moment, but in a slow accumulation of small things that I'd been choosing not to see. The last phone call we'd had, maybe 8 months before I came back, she'd sounded strange, flat, like she was reading from a script. When I asked her how she was, she said, fine. When I asked about her job, she said, fine. When I asked if she needed anything, there was a pause, just a half-second too long, and then she said no. I booked my flight 3 weeks later. I didn't tell her I was coming. I've asked myself since whether that was instinct or cowardice, and I still don't have a clean answer. Part of me was afraid she'd tell me not to come. Part of me already knew, somewhere beneath the part that was still pretending, that something had gone very wrong. So I stood at the end of my own driveway at 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in July, watching my daughter scrub baseboards on her knees, and I made myself keep walking. She didn't hear the bell at first. I rang it twice. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Celeste who answered. It was a woman I'd never seen before. She was around 40, well-dressed, blow-dried hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked at me with the particular expression of someone who owns the room they're standing in and is mildly inconvenienced by your presence in it. Behind her, in the hallway, I could see Celeste getting to her feet, wiping her hands on her shirt. "Can I help you?" the woman said. "That's my house," I said. There was a pause. "Mom," Celeste said from somewhere behind her. Her voice cracked on the word. Just slightly, but I heard it. The woman at the door. Her name, I learned later, was Nadine, stepped back just enough to let me in, the way you step back for a delivery person. Not welcoming. Not hostile. just transactional. She had the posture of someone who expected to be in charge of whatever happened next. I walked past her and went straight to my daughter. Celeste looked older than 38. I don't say that cruelly. I say it because it frightened me. There were shadows under her eyes that I recognized, not from genetics, but from exhaustion. Her shoulders curved inward slightly, the way a person's do when they've spent a long time trying to take up less space. She hugged me, and I felt how thin she was through the fabric of her shirt. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" she whispered. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" I said. She didn't answer. "I'd like to tell you I understood everything that first afternoon." I didn't. It came out in pieces, the way the truth usually does when someone has been protecting you from it, or protecting themselves from having to say it out loud. Here is what I eventually learned. Celeste had married the boyfriend. His name was Darren. About 4 years after I left. I knew about the wedding. I'd been there, flown back for it, bought the dress, cried at the ceremony like any mother would. What I hadn't understood, standing in that church, was who I was watching her marry. Darren had seemed, on the surface, like a man who loved her. He was organized, practical, good at details. He handled things. Celeste had always been a little scattered, a little dreamy, the kind of person who forgets to open her mail for 3 weeks. Darren handled the mail. He handled the bills. He handled the paperwork. He handled everything. His mother, Nadine, had moved into the house about 2 years after the wedding. Darren said it was temporary. She'd sold her condo in Mississauga and needed somewhere to stay while she figured out her next move. That was 4 years before I came back. Nadine had not figured out her next move. She had, however, figured out ours. I learned this slowly. I learned it from Celeste, speaking in a low voice in the upstairs hallway while Nadine watched television in the living room below us. I learned it from the way my daughter wouldn't make eye contact when she told me certain parts of it. I learned it from the guest room, the smallest bedroom, barely big enough for a single bed, where Celeste had been sleeping for the past 1.5 years, while Darren and Nadine occupied the 2 larger rooms. "Why are you in the small room?" I asked. She looked at her hands. Darren said the other rooms need to be kept available. Available for what? She didn't answer. I walked down the hall and opened the door to the master bedroom. It was Nadine's, clearly. Nice furniture, better than anything else in the house. Perfume bottles on the dresser, a silk robe draped over the chair. I closed the door. I opened the second bedroom. It had been converted into something between a home office and a storage room. Darren's equipment, boxes, a treadmill he clearly never used. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Then I went back to Celeste. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. "Which part?" she said. That was when I understood that there were many parts. The financial piece I discovered later that week, and it was the one that turned my stomach most. Darren had, over the course of several years, redirected the house's property tax notices, insurance renewals, and eventually the mortgage re-registration paperwork. The house had been mortgage-free, but he'd taken out a line of credit against it, citing home improvements, none of which I could find evidence of, to an address in his name. Not illegally, exactly, just quietly. Just the way you do things when the person whose name is on the title is someone who trusts you completely and has stopped reading her mail. Celeste had signed things. She admitted this. She signed them because Darren put them in front of her and told her they were routine, and she trusted him, and she had, in the years since I left, gradually handed over every practical corner of her life to someone who had used that trust to build himself a foundation at her expense. The line of credit was just under $90,000, drawn against my daughter's home. Spent on, I later found out, renovations to a cottage property in Darren's name near Huntsville, weekend trips, and a truck he bought the previous fall. I sat with this information for one night of lying in that small spare room. I'd taken it over, moved Celeste into the master with me, and staring at the ceiling and doing the arithmetic of how many Sundays I'd let go to voicemail. In the morning, I called my lawyer. His name is Stuart. I've used him for 20 years, since before my husband died, since before I signed the house over to Celeste. He's a small man with a quiet voice and the unhurried manner of someone who has seen a great many messes and cleaned up most of them. I told him what I knew. He asked me 4 questions. Then he told me to bring him every document I could find in that house. I spent 2 days going through filing cabinets, the kitchen drawer, the old shoebox on the closet shelf that Celeste kept insurance papers in. I photographed everything with my phone. I found the original title transfer in Celeste's name, signed by me. I found the line of credit application, Darren's signature, Celeste's signature, dated from a period she later told me she'd been recovering from a minor surgery and had been on pain medication for 2 weeks. I found 6 years of property tax bills forwarded to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. I sent everything to Stuart. He called me back the following Monday. "This is going to take some time," he said, "but it's going to be fine." Those were the 4 words, or close enough to them. I can't tell you that the next months were easy. They weren't. There were meetings with lawyers. Darren got one, of course, a sharper one than he deserved. And there were documents and counter-documents, and a mediation session that lasted 4 hours, and ended with Nadine crying in a way that I found theatrical, and Darren saying nothing at all, which I found more honest. There was a period of about 6 weeks where Darren and Nadine were still in the house while the legal process moved, and I was there too, and I want to tell you that I was dignified and measured throughout, and mostly that's true. There was one afternoon where I stood in the kitchen and watched Nadine open my daughter's refrigerator and take out the last of the orange juice and pour herself a glass without asking. And I said, very quietly, that if she did that again, I would have her things on the front lawn before the glass was empty. She looked at me. I looked at her. She put the juice back. Celeste had started sleeping properly again by the 2nd week. That sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. She'd been waking at 5 every morning because that was when Nadine got up and expected the kitchen to be clean. She'd been doing the laundry for 3 people, cooking most evenings. Keeping the house in the condition that Nadine felt was appropriate for a property of its value, which is a sentence that still makes my jaw tighten, because the property's value existed because I bought it, and the person who had lived as a guest in it for 4 years had never once paid rent. I made Celeste take 2 weeks off work. She argued with me about it. I told her it wasn't a request. She slept until 8:30 every morning. By the end of the 2nd week, she had started laughing again, real laughing, not the polite kind, and I understood that I had not heard her laugh like that in years, maybe since before the wedding, and I hadn't noticed when it stopped. The legal outcome was not everything I wanted and more than Darren deserved. The line of credit was deemed to have been obtained under conditions of undue influence, given the timing of Celeste's surgery and subsequent documentation of how decisions were made in the household. Darren was ordered to repay the balance, $87,000 and change, within 18 months, secured against the cottage property in Huntsville. He sold the cottage. He paid it. He moved to an apartment in Barrie that I know the address of but have never driven past, because I made a decision early on that I would not spend any more of my life in proximity to Darren's choices. Nadine left the same week the court order was issued. She took her furniture and her silk robe and her blow-dryer, and she left a ring on the kitchen counter from a coffee mug she didn't clean up. I wiped it up myself. I didn't mind. There are things I have to say about my own part in this, because I would not be honest if I didn't. I left. That's the fact I carry. I left my daughter in a house alone at 26, and I told myself she was old enough, and maybe she was. But old enough isn't the same as ready, and ready isn't the same as protected. I sent money when she asked, but I didn't ask enough questions about why she stopped asking. I told myself that no news was good news, and I was wrong about that, and it cost her years. I said this to Celeste. We've had the conversation more than once. Not fighting, not blaming, just talking. She said things too. She told me she was ashamed to tell me what was happening, that she felt stupid for letting it get that far, that she kept thinking it would get better on its own if she just tried harder to get along with Nadine, to make Darren happy, to be less difficult. She used those words, less difficult, as if she were the problem in her own home. We both cried. We've cried a few times. It's fine. That's what kitchens are for. I am still in the house. That was not the plan. I thought I might eventually find a smaller place nearby, give her the space, but Celeste asked me to stay, at least for a while, and I said yes. We've repainted 2 of the bedrooms. We got a new kitchen table. On Saturday mornings, we go to the farmer's market on Dunlop Street and buy things we don't entirely need, and drink terrible coffee from the paper cups they hand out at the cheese stall, and it is ordinary and it is enough. Last spring, Celeste started seeing a therapist. She found one herself, made the appointment herself, told me about it after the fact, with the slightly defiant tone of someone who expects to be told they don't need it. I told her I thought it was the best thing she'd done in years. She rolled her eyes, but she kept going. She's still at the dental office. She got a small promotion in the fall, front office coordinator, a title that means more responsibility than it sounds like. She bought herself a proper winter coat, the kind she'd been putting off buying for 3 years because Darren said the old one was fine. It's teal. She looks like herself in it. I think about the woman I saw through the window that first afternoon, on her knees in a gray shirt, with the kind of tired in her hands that builds up over years. And I think about who she is now, and the distance between those 2 things is the distance I am still learning to live with. I was gone too long. I know that, but I came back. I keep thinking about that teal coat. It sounds like such a small thing. A coat. But Celeste had been putting it off for 3 years because someone told her the old one was fine, and she believed him, or she was too tired to argue, or she'd stopped trusting her own sense of what she deserved. And then one afternoon last fall, she walked into a store and bought it herself, without asking anyone, without explaining herself to anyone. And she came home, and I saw her standing in the kitchen in this bright teal coat, and something in my chest came loose. That's what I think about when I try to make sense of everything that happened. Not the court order, not the $87,000, the coat. There's a version of this story where I blame Darren entirely. He did real harm. What he did to Celeste, the slow, patient dismantling of her confidence, the paperwork signed during her recovery, the way he and his mother reshaped the whole geography of her own home until she was a guest in it. None of that was accidental, and none of it was her fault. He knew exactly what he was doing. People who do that kind of damage always do. But I also know this. What made it possible, over 12 years, was the space I left behind when I got on that plane to Halifax. Not because leaving was wrong. I had reasons. I had grief and debt and a contract that felt like a lifeline at the time. But I told myself that sending money and calling on Sundays meant I was present, and I wasn't. Presence isn't a wire transfer. Presence is noticing when the voice on the phone sounds flat and asking the harder question instead of accepting fine. Darren took advantage of someone who was vulnerable. But Celeste became more vulnerable, slowly, because the person who knew her best had stopped paying close enough attention. That's the cause. The effect ran for years before I came home to see it. What I've learned, really learned, not just understood in theory, is that good intentions don't protect the people we love. Only attention does. Only showing up does. Celeste is a grown woman, and she is capable, and she is smart, and she still needed someone who would notice the things she'd stopped saying out loud. That's not weakness on her part. That's just how it works for most of us. We need people who are paying attention. I think about the clarity Celeste has found in the past year. She went to therapy because she decided she wanted to understand how she'd gotten so far from herself, and she had the honesty to sit in that chair week after week and look at it straight on. That takes something that can't be faked. a willingness to be uncomfortable in pursuit of something true. I'm proud of her for that, more proud of that than of anything that happened in a courtroom. And I think about what it took, practically, to get her house back. Stuart wasn't magic. He was thorough. He asked the right questions and read every document and understood which arguments would hold. Having a good lawyer matters. Understanding your own paperwork matters. Knowing what you signed and why matters. I don't say that to make anyone feel bad for trusting the wrong person. I say it because the best thing any of us can do after something like this is come out of it knowing more than we did going in. Celeste knows more now. So do I. The house on Sunnydale Road is still hers. The kitchen table is new. On Saturday mornings, we drink bad coffee and buy cheese we don't need, and she laughs like herself, and I do not take that for granted for even one single morning. I was gone too long. But I came back and I stayed, and the coat is teal. And that's enough.